Are you an animal or a person?
I'm animal gorilla.
Now I can change a man into a gorilla. A man to a gorilla.
Are you an animal or a person?
I'm animal gorilla.
The words we just heard were spoken by the gorilla Koko to the human being Penny Patterson. Let's look at those words from the point of view of the way a world looks to a culture critic. And let's take culture apart like these balls of yarn. First, I'd like to explain the principle that I use in looking at the production of modern culture. It seems to me the cultural critic is faced by a world that looks very much like tangled balls of yarn, and that one way to approach the situation is to pull on a thread and begin to untangle the ball of meanings and begin to trace through one thread and then another what gets to count as nature, for whom and when, and how much it costs to produce nature at a particular moment in history for a particular group of people. What gets to count as nature, for whom and when, and how much it costs to produce nature at a particular moment in history for a particular group of people, 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 for a particular group of people. And another way to imagine the same situation is to take a layer cake, Pepperidge Farm layer cake, formerly boycotted because of the Nestle bottle feeding scandal, to take a layer cake and cut into history as if it were a layer cake and begin to unpack the layers of meanings. Okay. Unpack the layers of meanings of all of the pleasures and all of the problems that these layers of meanings produce for the historian and the culture critic. So let's go back to Penny Patterson and Koko and the problem of the talking gorillas and the talking chimpanzees in the first world in this mythic time called the late 20th century. And let's do it by looking at some covers of the National Geographic magazine that presented Koko to an American public in the 1970s. The first cover of a National Geographic magazine we see is Koko the gorilla taking a picture of herself in the mirror with a Japanese camera. And what we see is the gorilla with the attribute of self-reflection, self-vision. The gorilla with a Japanese tourist camera sees herself in the mirror and takes her own picture. She's in charge of her own image. She represents universal man. The next picture we see in the National Geographic magazine is Koko the gorilla with the kitten in her arms. Koko herself with a pet. Koko again is universal man who names the animals. There's a wonderful story associated with Koko and the kitten. The kitten's name is All Ball, named by Koko as her own pet companion. Koko had asked Penny for a kitten for several months and had always been turned down by her human companion, Penny Patterson, on the grounds basically that she wouldn't take care of her pet, that she might be too rough with her, she wouldn't feed her, she wouldn't clean up after her, the kitten would probably be abused, the same grounds that other kids in the Silicon Valley are refused pets. So when the kitten, All Ball, wanders into Koko's trailer in the Los Altos Hills and Koko adopts the kitten, we learn several things. We learn, first of all, that this is a kitten who was suckled by a dog, that this is a kitten who is already on the boundaries of species meanings. And this ambiguous boundary animal kitten wanders into Koko's world, is taken up by Koko and named, as Adam names the animals in the Garden of Eden. And once again, Coco is typed as universal man in the setting of the Silicon Valley in the Los Altos Hills. The next image of Coco that we see is Coco looking at herself in the mirror and looking at a book of the three little kittens who lost their mittens. And Coco is signing naughty, naughty. And we learn two things about Coco as she reads her childhood book with the animal characters, the three little kittens who lost their mittens. We learn first that Coco engages in moral discourse, that she knows the difference between good behavior and naughty behavior, and that the other animals represent themselves to Coco just as they do to human children. That Coco reads the book of nature as a question of natural and sacred history, that Coco engages in moral discourse, and again has the signs of universal man. And so we have two of the strands, self-reflection, naming the animals, and the third sign, moral discourse. American Sign Language is a human language. Disabled people who speak American Sign Language, who communicate with this language, have pointed out the power relationships in which that language is situated at the boundary between nature and culture, so that the traffic across nature and culture for late 20th century first world people in the United States is mediated through a language of the disabled, and so that the markings of universal man in turn are mediated through an animal, a primate, Coco, who signifies not a female adolescent gorilla or a particular animal at a particular place in a particular history, but rather the animal represents universal man.
You could talk to the animals, could you justify your reasons?
Okay, first, can you tell me about what you see? Can you tell me a little about that? What do you see? Margie, trouble! Wait a minute. I've got to see if there's someone in here that looks like Margie. Just a minute. Well, there's a monkey swimming on this one. Just be patient, be patient. I have to look. Pennywise. Well, there's a girl that looks like Margie. Yes, there's a girl feeding a monkey, and she looks a bit like Margie.
So what do we do with the gorilla who has the sign of the book, the camera, naming the animals, the gorilla who says, fine animal gorilla, when she's asked if she's an animal or a person? Who is this universal man who is separated from every history? Well, first of all, Coco the gorilla is born in the San Francisco Zoo. How does she come to be the companion of the psychology graduate student at Stanford, Penny Patterson? And how is it that Penny Patterson gets to keep her? One of the first things to remember is that zoos are able to have these endangered animals only if they somehow get themselves involved in helping these animals to reproduce, in the reproductive politics that are part of conservation politics. So the mayor of San Francisco, the politicians of San Francisco, people who speak for science, people who speak for nature, get involved in liberating Coco the gorilla from the zoo where she is spectacle to Santa Clara Valley, to the Silicon Valley, where she's a companion to Penny Patterson, speaking American Sign Language and representing man, only if Penny Patterson can also show that this speaking gorilla, who shouldn't be spectacle because she speaks, will also reproduce. So Penny Patterson and her allies buy Michael, another gorilla kidnapped from the wild, who was also taught American Sign Language, and who was kept as a consort for Penny, that she would grow up and have a speaking consort, be removed from spectacle in the San Francisco Zoo, and in a speaking reproductive politics, reproduce in the arena of science. Penny Patterson and Coco engaged in this reproductive politics in the Silicon Valley in the Los Altos Hills. Let's turn from the Penny Patterson and Coco story to another scene of the traffic across nature and culture. This time, let's look at Indonesia, and let's look at another cover of the National Geographic magazine, this time with Baruta Galdakos and two orangutan orphans clinging to the maternal body of science-coded female. We have in this situation a scientist, Baruta Galdakos, teaching kidnapped infants from the wild how to be wild. These are infants who are taught by the human being to return to nature. And if we look at the other picture, we see Birute Galdakas's son, Binti, in a plastic bathtub with one of the orangutan orphans, Princess, taking a bath together. And in the story between Binti and Princess, we learn that the orangutan Princess teaches the human child Binti his first human word in American Sign Language, while Binti's natural mother is teaching Princess how to be wild. We also learn that Birute Galdakas's favorite orangutan rehabilitant or orphan, Sujito, has at adolescence fallen in love with Birute Galdakas and needs to be relocated in the forest, far distant from the scene of the rehabilitation of the orphans, lest his out-of-control libidinal love for his mother, his illegitimate and incompletely phallically, Oedipally reorganized love for his mother, interfere with the traffic across nature and culture. Images of the traffic across that sacred boundary between nature and culture abound. For example, we have here in a narrative history of the portrait in photography, a family, a middle-class American family at the zoo for an afternoon. The family consists of a white blonde woman, a black man, 2 chimpanzee children, and a human child of ambiguous ethnic identity. This is the kind of species racial recoding that we find in modern American culture. We have also a greeting card of this strange 1950s television family, the unmarried couple, Tarzan and Jane, their adopted child, boy, and their strange chimpanzee daughter. We have this family that exists at the boundary between nature and culture, and we need to ask why these boundary objects and why this particular moment in history. This particular moment in history deals with 2 particularly important world-changing events. One of them is decolonization and the achievement of national independence all over the Third World, and the second is multinationalism and the reorganization of nature in a multinational system of production in the post-World War II moment. Race, sex, and class are recoded on the boundaries between nature and culture. So let's leave the Los Altos Hills, the Silicon Valley, the San Francisco Zoo. Let's leave these first world spaces where Penny and Coco engaged in a narrative about universal man, surrogacy, and rehabilitation. And let's go to a strange mythic space called the wilds of Tanzania. And let's go there with the National Geographic magazine. Here we are in the wilds of Tanzania, brought there by the National Geographic magazine, and the National Geographic television specials. But despite the fact that I know how to load my magazine now, we're going to go to the wilds of Tanzania unarmed. But the question we have to ask in the wilds of Tanzania is, what exactly does it cost to put a white virgin blonde woman in this strange sacred place called the wilds of Tanzania in 1960? What does it cost to be alone in nature the year that the Belgian Congo becomes the Republic of the Congo, and Jane Goodall, on her way to the scenes of intimacy with the wild chimpanzees in the Gombe Stream Preserve, the scenes of intimacy that have become part of television life, part of the touch with nature from the first world to the third world. What does it cost to be alone in nature as Jane Goodall and her mother stop on the shores of the lake before taking the boat to the Gombe Stream and make 2,000 Spam sandwiches for fleeing Belgians, the year of the independence of the Republic of the Congo?
For most, this would be a lonely, forbidding realm. But for Jane Goodall, it was where she most wanted to be.
During my first days at Gombe, I could hardly believe it was true. At last, I was out in the wild.
Understanding is everything. The Sun and Earth logo of the Gulf Corporation, one of the 7 sisters, of course, and I like to think of this particular unraveling and cultural commentary on what gets to count as nature, as The Nature of Gender for the Seven Sisters. One of the Seven Sisters, the Gulf Oil Corporation, is bringing us Jane Goodall alone in this extraordinary space called the wilds of Tanzania. Well, when can woman best represent man is one of the first questions we have here. What we have in this advertisement is the leathery hand of the animal reaching in and initiating touch from the region of nature. The animal initiates touch as the white, virgin human hand reaches in to receive the touch of the animal at precisely the historical moment that white man is expelled from the wilds of Tanzania, from the heart of Africa, at precisely the moment that white man is no longer welcome as the colonizers in Africa. Race, recoded onto the animal, reaches out and touches a woman who is coded as scientist, but coded as Dr. Goodall only after she's first coded as Jane. The animal reaches out, touch is established, and the woman exits from the touch as Dr. Goodall. Then we see Jane Goodall on the top of a mountain, a young virgin white woman coded as self-sufficient, a very strange state in a regime of compulsory heterosexuality, a very strange state to code a young virgin woman as self-sufficient and complete unto herself. We see her on the top of a mountain, waiting for dawn's first light, waiting to see the chimpanzees across the chasm on the other side of the valley. We see her pulling a blanket around herself. We hear voiceover, Jane Goodall's voiceover about her self-sufficiency, about her loneliness, about her seeking this pure touch with nature. And all of a sudden, there's a tiny little intervening sign in the picture that disrupts the entire thing. The tiny little thread that we pull apart is a can of pork and beans. Jane Goodall is eating a can of pork and beans, alone on the mountain. Now, anyone who has even heard of the Civil War will remember how armor made his fortunes, how the canning industries grew out of the Civil War, how the history of industrial capitalism, how the history of the canning industry, the history of standardization in war, the history of the possibility of sustaining the particular penetration into nature that the breakup of the African continent by the European colonial powers in the 19th century, that's what's coded into that can of pork and beans that sustains Jane Goodall on her mountain late at night while she's waiting for first sight of the animals who will come to her in the morning. But when she returns with camera-wielding husband in tow, who will do the pictures for the National Geographic, and with PhD to found an international research site, Jane returns at the moment that a character named Flo has just had a new baby. Flo has just given birth to Flint. Jane Goodall very quickly also gives birth to a human infant named Grub. We see the drama of the family of Flo and her kids, of Flo and Flint, Jane and Grub, as the drama of the production of science in this space called the wilds of Tanzania. And we see enacted the transition from girl guide to mature woman. And this is the story that's coded onto American televisions as the story of the re-entry of Western man through white woman into nature. Now remember that the National Geographic magazine is given as a wedding present, has been given as a wedding present, perhaps more than any other magazine in American history. This is the magazine that marks the founding of the family in middle-class America. It's the magazine that tells the responsibility of imperialism from the Spanish-American War to the present to an American reading public, where it codes race, sex, and class onto the body of nature. Well, let's head to space.
Unleash the ultimate weapon! Constructicons, transform! Phase 1!
Now, there's several boundaries that are at issue as we enter space, but it's the boundary between organism and machine that's at issue as we move into space. What we've all become as we move into space is cyborgs. Cyborgs for earthly survival is the pin that I've got on. I'm wearing a T-shirt that comes from the Nevada test site action in May 1987. The Nevada test site action T-shirt has a view of the planet Earth, spaceship Earth, which is the view from the space race. It's a view of the world that's only possible in view of the Cold War and the space race. And yet it's been an image that's appropriated for Love Your Mother. It's an image that's appropriated for an anti-nuclear action, an action that affirms the Western Shoshone possession of the land that the federal government has invaded for its nuclear weapons test site. It's an image that tells us about our status as cyborgs and that tells us about the point of view from an extraterrestrial position. As the science of the Jane Goodall story is coded female, the science of the space race is coded male. And this is a place where the body is turned into an information processing device, is turned into a mechanism for generating streams of data. The body is part of the loop with the machine. We're both communications devices. Like the Jane Goodall story, this also is about touch, communication, information, the perfect reunion of the parts of the world in the post-World War II order. But this is a narrative that works between human, or among human, animal, and machine. This is a narrative that makes the boundary between the human being and the machine particularly ambiguous.
He's won!
This is a character named Ham, the first American to space. Ham is an immigrant to the United States. He's an Afro-American, where race is coded back onto the body of the animal. And like the Afro-Americans held in subhuman status in slavery, Ham, the first American in space, is a captive, brought here against his will, captured violently out of Africa, and put into the space race as a particularly interesting kind of character who embodies the breakdown of the boundary between organism and machine. But the chimpanzee Ham got his name Ham only after his successful space flight into suborbital flight. He, unlike John Glenn, didn't make it into completely orbital flight, but only that phallic parabola of suborbital flight. Well, Ham got his name when he got back, lest, had the mission been unsuccessful, he had been, their word not mine, aborted. Had the mission been aborted, Ham would have had no name. Ham would have been number 65, though he was familiarly referred to by his trainers, we learn, as Chop Chop Chang, the stunning racism coded onto the body of the animal in first world culture. Ham is embodied in a particularly interesting dynamic of the crisis of masculinism in the early 1960s in the space race, where the right stuff of the jet airplane test pilot is challenged by the machinery of the space race and the sufficiency of the animal as surrogate for man in space. And man himself is a media star, is John Glenn in front of the camera, is astronaut White in front of the camera with the American flag coded onto his spacesuit and the blank screen of his face looking at us from 1965 Life magazine. Ham, number 65, Chop Chop Chang. Ham, youngest son of Noah, the only black son of Noah, but that wasn't what they meant. They meant Holloman arithmetical. Ham is an acronym. Ham's name is an acronym of the space race and weapons testing. Ham is a cyborg whose body has been turned into the source of endless streams of data. Has your data been saved? Forget the grammar. Cyborgs for earthly survival. Ham is part of the loop of machine, man, and animal in which the body is turned into an endlessly coded stream of data, in which the body and the sciences which know it are inscription devices in the text of culture.
You look up slowly. You're quite calm. You don't expect to see a thing. Then you just follow my direction. All right? Camera. Look up slowly, Ann. That's it. You don't see anything. Now look higher. Still higher. Now you see it. You're amazed. You can't believe it. Your eyes open wider. It's horrible, Ann, but you can't look away. There's no chance for you, Ann. No escape.
What do you think she's really going to see?
In his book, The Name of the Rose, Umberto Eco has the character Jorge, the old librarian who wants to suppress the text, the lost text of Aristotle on the rhetoric of humor, say to William, the man who's trying to uncover the murders in the monastery, the following: If the rhetoric of conviction were to be replaced by the rhetoric of mockery, if the topics of the patient construction of the images of redemption were to be replaced by the topics of the impatient dismantling and upsetting of every holy and venerable image, oh, on that day, even you, William, and all your knowledge would be swept away. Well, the question that confronts us as we leave the wilds of Tanzania and the extraterrestrial and mythic regions of space, the Silicon Valley and the Los Altos Hills, the question confronts us of what oppositional politics look like. And the first principle that it seems to me we have to learn is that reversal won't work. The card at first struck me as extremely funny and a perfect reversal of the King Kong story. I saw the broken shackle on the Marilyn Monroe figure and understood that this was a women's lib figure who had broken spectacle and had entered the space of desire, but that her desire was taking place in the closed space of the bedroom, and that in this picture, the instruments of late capitalism were not going to be called in to resolve the sexual and racial politics between King Kong and the blonde virgin. The cruise missile won't enter this bedroom as the airplane shot Kong off of that symbol of monopoly capital, the Empire State Building. The silverback gorilla is pulling the blanket up, pursing his lips in a kind of fear and astonishment. And the King Kong figure very quickly comes across to us as a feminized black man, indeed as a black queen. And the tones of homophobia begin to emerge from the image of the Hallmark card. So that what I think we end up saying with this kind of object lesson that reversals don't work is that our oppositional politics are indeed to recode nature and culture, but our recodings are going to have to be unwindings and rewindings and decodings and recodings that again and again and again make clear to us the contradictions of race, sex, and class in what gets to count as nature, for whom, and at what price.